Loneliness is as bad for your health as smoking half a pack of cigarettes a day,
Wow.
and it's as bad for your health as being obese.
So how do we live a good life? I mean, that's like as high level as I can get.
Well, I've got lots of ideas, but as one of my teachers said, without data, I'm just another guy with an opinion. So I'm going to tell you about what science tells us about living a good life, because we've spent 85 years studying it. And what science tells us won't surprise you. It's stay engaged with things you love and stay engaged with people you care about.
Wait, so you're at the helm of a study that has been ongoing for 85 years.
Yes,
Tell me about that.
I'm the fourth director. It started in 1938, and it started as a study of how young people live their lives and hopefully take healthy developmental paths. Started as two studies that didn't even know about each other, a group of Harvard College undergrads, 19-year-old sophomores, and a group of inner city boys from Boston's poorest neighborhoods.
Wow. I mean, they were young at the time, 85 years ago.
They were really young.
Now, I mean, at this point, how old are they?
Almost all have died,
Wow.
but about 40 are left out of 724. They're all in their late 90s or early 100s.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was the intent of the study?
The Harvard study was to study normal young adult development. So, of course, if you want to study normal young adult development, you study all white men from Harvard, right? Like, this is the most politically incorrect sample you could ever have. But the inner city study was a study of why some kids from terrible backgrounds, from not just impoverished backgrounds, but families that were in trouble, domestic violence, mental illness, lots of problems. Why did those kids stay out of trouble and take good developmental paths? So, what were the factors that could contribute to healthy development, even when you had so many strikes against you?
Fascinating. So how did it end up being the case that you were able to mine this cohort for like the data on happiness that you've then built a career talking about and reporting on?
We're not actually a study of happiness. We're a study of adult development, but that includes thriving. So we ask about mental health, physical health, work, relationships, and all of that, when we put it together, gives us information about who thrives throughout their lives and who doesn't do so well.
Hmm. So what seem to be the characteristics among those who thrive, and how do they differ from those who, don't do as well?
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly what you have spent a lot of your career doing, talking about physical health, is crucial. So we found that the people who took care of their health lived longer, they stayed free of disability longer, all those things that we know to be the case. What we were surprised by was that the people who lived the longest and stayed the healthiest had the warmest connections and the greatest number of connections with other people. So what we did when we had followed all of our original people to age 80, we said, okay, let's look back at what we knew about them at age 50. And let's see, could we predict from what we knew at age 50 who was going to do well when they got to their 80s and who wasn't? We thought it would be cholesterol level. We thought it would be blood pressure. It wasn't. It was how satisfied you were in your connections with other people. We didn't believe it at first, but then other studies began to find the same thing.
I saw somewhere that you found out just in the research that I was doing on you prior to this, to our taping, that the magnitude of the effect, it was like loneliness was on par with like smoking or like alcoholism.
Yes. What they've calculated is that loneliness is as bad for your health as smoking half a pack of cigarettes a day,
Wow.
and it's as bad for your health as being obese.
Wow.
Yeah.
How does that work?
We've been spending the last 10 years of my research career figuring that out. How do relationships actually get into your body and change your body? And we think it has mostly to do with stress. This idea that we all have stress every day, and that we're meant to go into the fight or flight response when we're faced with a stressor. And that's okay. Blood pressure goes up, all that stuff. But we are also meant to go back to equilibrium when the threat is removed. What we think happens is that people who are isolated and lonely don't have those people who can help them calm down, who can help them return to baseline. Because if you think about it, if you've had something really upsetting happen and you have somebody you can call, you can literally feel your body calm down as you talk about what happened.
Oh, I feel so lucky. I have such a tight knit community, and I have such a tight knit family.
Yeah.
I've got two younger brothers. I see them 3, 4 nights a week, if not more. My friends were all super close, and I had a therapist for the past year. Yeah, I totally see how being able to offload some of your stress and anxiety about life, which is inevitable, right,
Yeah.
is such a boon to all the other areas
Yeah.
of your life.
Yeah. And what we're finding is if you can build that kind of community that you've built for yourself, right, and maintained, that you set yourself up to have a healthier life as well as a happier life.
So, what's the difference between loneliness and being alone? Like loneliness is like I feel like loneliness is like it's not just being alone, but it's like also not being pleased about it.
Exactly. So loneliness is that experience of I'm not as connected to people as I want to be, which is very different from being alone and being content with that.
Mm.
So, you know, Zen Priest. I mean, I can spend a lot of time alone on a meditation cushion quite happily. But and many people are shy, are introverts, and those people don't need a lot of other people around in order to get this health benefit. So what we're really talking about is people who are experiencing this feeling of being too alone. I'm not connected. I want to be connected. That's where the stress comes.
Wow. I wonder, is there like a personality test or metric or something that, people might be able to use as a tool to know whether or not they require more social connection
Mm.
or less?
It's a great question. I mean, in a lot of ways, the test is the simplest thing imaginable. It's, do I feel lonely?
Mm.
And 1 in 4 people in the United States will tell you they feel lonely.
1 in 4.
1 in 4. 1 in 3 CEOs of companies report feeling lonely. I mean, this is an epidemic.
CEOs,
CEOs,
they're busy people.
they're busy. They're top of the heap.
It's like that saying, it's lonely at the top.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be true?
Well, I'm not exactly at the top. Like I have a boss at my hospital, fortunately, and I have a Zen teacher. And so I'm probably not as good an example, but people who really run things often feel that they don't have peers to talk to. And that's why actually many leaders in companies find other leaders to talk to.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Why do you think so many civilians feel 1 in 4, you said? Why are we seeing this epidemic of loneliness? That's a big number. That's a big
Yeah.
proportion.
Yeah. It's been trending that way for years. So there's a sociologist named Robert Putnam who studied this. He wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And what he found was starting in the 1950s in the US, we stopped investing in other people, in what he calls social capital. We stopped going out. We stopped joining bowling leagues, going to churches and synagogues. We stopped doing all those things and we stopped having people over. And it started in the 1950s with the advent of, guess what?
The car?
Well,
No, that was in the 20s.
close.
I don't know.
Television.
Television.
We started staying home and staring at screens, and people stopped doing all these other things. And then Putnam went back in the early 2000s, and he found that all these things had gotten much, much worse. And we think that's because of the advent of the digital age and all the screens that we are so addicted to, myself included.
Jesus, what do you think like social media is doing to our mental health?
Well, we know something. So, first of all, there's a lot more research we need to do and is being done. But we have the sense, first of all, that screens are not going away, but that how you use screens and how you use social media is key. If we use social media actively to connect with other people, that's energizing. That's not a recipe for loneliness and poorer health. So, I have friends who connected with their old buddies from elementary school during the pandemic on Zoom, and they start having these weekly calls and they are thrilled. Okay. The alternative is to be passive consumers of social media, meaning scrolling through somebody's Instagram feed, for example, which is a recipe for comparison, which we know makes us less happy. And it's a recipe for feeling like I'm missing out on life. Other people are having a great life and I'm not, which we know is a fiction rationally, except it still engenders that feeling of FOMO in most of us.
Wow. Is there any data from the 50s on the proportion of people that felt lonely? Like, is it increasing? Do we know?
We know that it's increasing. I know that we only started measuring loneliness in a research way probably in the 80s and 90s. And so we don't know in the 50s in the same way that we can know now. But since the 1980s, it has been on the rise. In fact, the UK appointed a minister of loneliness.
Wow.
They're so worried about this for good reason.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are we as Americans, like here in the US, are we worse off than other like westernized countries? Like is it I'm inclined to think it's particularly bad here.
It's bad here, but it's bad lots of places. It's actually bad in Scandinavia.
Hmm.
When we think of as among the happiest places in the world, it's bad in China because of the social dislocation. Lots of young people have moved away from their traditional villages and their homes, and they've moved into cities where they live rather anonymously.
Hmm.
And so the essentially what we're finding is that more traditional cultures starting to break down coincide with a rise in loneliness.
Wow.
India is worrying about it now. And they are one of the cultures where it was absolutely the norm for multiple generations to live together. That's beginning to change.
Hmm. Man, Scandinavia. That's surprising. I love like Finnish sauna culture and like the contrast therapy, like the
Yeah,
go back and forth from like saunas to the cold plunge, and
yeah,
to me it seems like that's a great opportunity for socialization that they have, and there's not really an analog of that here in the US,
right,
you know?
right. And you're right. There, each culture has these structures, these rituals that help us be together, like the Finns do. And in every culture they exist. The question is how many people are getting left on the margins,
Mm,
and that's increasing.
yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, there's sports,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Concerts and things like that.
absolutely. And lots of clubs. I mean, people, gardening clubs and birding clubs, and so many things that people join that
Mm.
are there for us to do if we do it. The difficulty is getting people off the couch, off their screens, out into the world.
Yeah. Are there any parts of the world where people seem to be particularly not lonely?
Yes, and they're often the places where community is valued above individualism. So there are villages. They've studied the blue zones, Dan Buettner's work. There are these villages, like in Japan, there's a village where people are assigned a friend group when they're 5 years old. And
Wow.
that's their friend group for their whole lives. And you see these people sitting around in their 80s, 90s with their friends who they've had their whole lives.
Damn. Imagine if you get stuck with like somebody who's
Well, I
annoying.
know, I know exactly. But there are these ways that some cultures really structure it so that we're not alone.
So important. So, what could we each be doing more of, less of,
Yeah.
to, yeah, to feel less lonely.
Well, just like you encourage people to be very intentional about how they eat, about how they care for their bodies, what we're hoping is that people will be more intentional about how they take care of their relationships.
Hmm.
That we use the term in the book relationship fitness
Oh, I like that.
deliberately because the idea is it's like physical fitness. You go to the gym today and you don't come home and say, "Good, I'm done. I don't ever have to do that again."
Right.
Right? Right? And the thing with relationships is I used to think, like in my 20s, I thought, my good friends are always going to be my good friends. They're just there. I don't have to worry about that. But what we know is that relationships that are perfectly good can wither away from neglect. So, what we'd like to see people doing more of is being active in reaching out to each other, making sure they see the people they want in their life more regularly. Like you said, you see your brothers a few times a week. That's huge. That's huge. My co author and I, Mark Schultz, he and I are buddies. Like we're research collaborators, but we have a phone call every Friday at noon. And yeah, we talk about research, but we also just talk about our lives and our kids and things that annoy us. And so
Wow.
we are good friends because that phone call is there. One of us would have to cancel it in order for it not to happen.
Mm. I've heard of that as like a really effective strategy to keep to like essentially schedule
Yes.
routine social opportunities.
Yes. In fact, when my wife and I had little kids, we decided to take the advice of some friends and we had a date night. So every Thursday night, we had a babysitter come and she was going to come no matter what. Like it was just automatic.
Hmm.
So we didn't even have to know what we were going to do. We were just going to get out of the house. So somebody else fed our kids dinner and put them to bed. And even if we just went to the mall, as long as we could come home once the kids were in bed, we had time just to talk to each other finally, instead of being a tag team. So it can happen even with the people who are like closest to you, those people who you take for granted, maybe. Um,
Super smart.
yeah,
I have a good friend of mine, Drew Pruitt. He's part of like a men's group.
yeah,
And I actually have a few friends, male friends, who are in these so-called men's groups. I don't know what happens in these groups,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
I think they have like it's like a Sunday meetup, like scheduled every Sunday. I could be wrong on the timing, but I think it's like something like that. It's scheduled, regimented,
Yep.
and the only time it doesn't happen is if it's explicitly canceled.
Right,
Yeah.
right. My wife has a regular phone call with her best friend who lives all the way across the country. And, even if we have one of those in our lives, even if you could think of one person who you'd like to have that kind of schedule with, could be every week, could be every month, whatever you want, but just something regular that'll
Hmm.
happen no matter what.
It's so interesting to me that people can be. We already talked about how people can be alone but not lonely. But then conversely, people can actually be immersed, right? Like in with others, whether it's in relationship or in a work environment, but then still feel completely lonely.
Exactly. A lot has to do with whether you feel like people know you and get you. So, you go to work every day and you may have a whole lot of colleagues, but they may not know anything about your personal life. Um, the Gallup organization did a survey of like 15 million workers and asked, "Do you have a best friend at work?" Meaning, do you have somebody you talk to about personal matters? Only 3 out of 10 had a best friend at work.
Wow.
And those people were more engaged in their work. They were happier. They were better workers. They were less likely to leave their jobs because they had a reason to go to work, a personal reason. Rather than it being a distraction, that kind of connection makes people more tied to wherever they're working.
Wow. Yeah, I feel very lucky. I have, a few people that I work with, Sydney being like my primary colleague, and we're, you know, we have a great working relationship, but we also, like, I feel like, get each other.
Yeah,
So it makes work fun.
yeah, yeah. And that's it. That sense of she gets you, you get her. That's a really strong, powerful connector. And we don't have to have that with everybody, but boy, having that with at least one person is really important.
Yeah. What do you do if you just can't find that in the work setting? Because also, I mean, isn't like in the corporate environment today, it's getting really tricky to know what to share, right, about your personal life.
Fair enough. And I think what we have to do is test the waters. So let's say there is somebody who you think, ah, this person could be a friend, a personal friend. You try it out a little bit. Is this person trustworthy? Could I share something personal and that person won't feel intruded on? They won't tell anyone else. There's just that kind of trustworthiness. And you can test it out in small steps first.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good to test the waters before you start unloading,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like uber personal, intimate details.
Yeah, don't wanna do that, and
Mm.
people can feel intruded on if you do that too much, right?
Right.
If they're not ready for that. So you sorta it's like a little dance you see is if I share something with this person, will they share something back? And does it gradually deepen?
Yeah. What about intimate relationships? What does the research say there with regard to long term happiness?
Well, first of all, you don't have to have an intimate relationship to get this benefit, to be happier and healthier, but intimate relationships are really important. There is research that shows that people who are partnered live longer.
Hmm.
Men live longer on average than women, and marriage has always been a better deal for
For
men than
men.
for women. But but the other thing we know is that really difficult relationships may be worse for your health than splitting up. So there's always some kind of judgment that has to be made. Uh,
It's about the quality of the relationship
exactly.
and whether or not, like you said, is appropriate in work, whether or not the person that you're sharing a bed with gets you. Because
Yeah.
I feel like people can be stuck in relationships where their significant other doesn't actually even know them.
Exactly, exactly. They can feel totally lonely. Um, but the one thing that's true is that relationships don't have to be smooth all the time. You could get the impression from what I'm saying that everything has to be warm and happy all the time. Not true. Any relationship of any depth has conflicts in it. The real question is how do we resolve those conflicts? Can we work on them together? Can we get through a hard time and come away actually feeling closer. Certainly not feeling like one person won and one person lost, that kind of thing. But I just say that because it's easy to get the impression that you should jettison a relationship if there are any difficulties, and that's not true.
Yeah, I agree with that. I love the concept that you brought up earlier of relationship fitness. Like how else can you work out your relationship muscles? Like any other like tips, strategies?
Yeah. Um, Learn to talk to strangers and learn to talk to the people you see throughout your day who are what we call casual ties, because that actually matters. So, the person you get your coffee from at Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, right? Or the person who delivers your mail, that those people give us little hits of well being, and we can do the same for them just by acknowledging them, just by saying a few pleasant words. And it turns out that those relationships are valuable as well for our health and our happiness.
I love that.
Yeah.
I do that. I try to strike up conversation provided I have the time whenever I can. If I'm
Yeah.
grabbing coffee with my like, the person who yeah, who delivers my mail, the people behind the counter at the gym I go to when I check in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great strategy. It gives you like a little hit of dopamine.
Yeah.
It reminds you in those moments that we're social animals.
Yes. Yes. And that's a lot of what we need, that kind of recognition of, oh yeah, I'm glad you're here, glad to see you, that kind of thing actually makes a difference. And they accumulate those little hits of well-being.
Yeah. What about because you study happiness? What about like money, finances, things like that? The notion that you can't buy happiness.
You can't.
You
Well,
can't.
you can up to a point. So they actually did a study a few years ago asking, as your income goes up, does your happiness continue to go up? And they found that while you're still getting your basic needs met, yes, happiness goes up. So, but as you get up to like 75,000 a year household income, your happiness really does increase until you get to the 75K level.
And that number probably changes based
Oh,
on inflation and the
and
right.
where you live,
Yeah.
right? Absolutely.
Like
But
75K in West Hollywood.
would be nothing, right? I know, I know. But the point is that once you get, a roof over your head and food security and access to healthcare and the ability to provide for your family the basics, then as your income goes up, your happiness doesn't go up that much. Not much at all. So difference between 75,000 and 75 million, not so great.
Wow. What about the notion that buying things doesn't bring happiness?
They've actually studied this. They asked people, how do you use your discretionary income? And then they had them report on how happy they were after they bought a new car, as opposed to how happy they were when they took their family on a vacation. Buying things makes us less happy, and the happiness lasts a shorter time than buying experiences.
Hmm.
So I can tell you a little bit about why, because they've studied it. It turns out that things beg for comparison. So if I buy a new flat screen TV and I'm really excited about it and I bring it home, great. And then I go to my friend's house and she's got a bigger flat screen TV and I'm like, oh, right. So comparison makes us less happy. We know that. When we pay for experiences, we're usually doing it either with people we know, so we're building new memories, maybe deepening relationships, or we're connecting with new people. And either way, those experiences get to be shared, but comparison doesn't really matter that much. So all that goes into why buying things doesn't make us as happy as buying experiences.
You also, there's like, I remember reading a study a while back that found that the mere anticipation of something brings joy, right?
Yeah.
So if you are, and correct me if I'm mischaracterizing this, but I thought this was like one of the coolest studies and offered a rare insight into psychology that's like profoundly actionable. Where like if you have the option to spend X dollars on an experience that's tomorrow or 6 months from now, you actually get more bang for your buck from the standpoint of happiness scheduling out 6 months from now.
That's right. That's right. People talk about trips that way. Like, I'm going to go on this vacation. Well, actually, I want time. I want time to plan it. I want time to anticipate it. If you said to me, go on a vacation tomorrow, okay, that'd be good. But really being able to look forward to it
Yeah.
3 months from now, that's bigger.
Yeah. I recently, like, I spent, these weren't cheap tickets, but I bought concert tickets for next summer because they went on sale. And I was
Yeah.
like, I'm psyched to now have them,
Yeah.
I love that. And then also there's like the ability to look back on something, like on an event and reflect on it, right? There's like the remembering self.
Yes. And if you're looking back on a good event that you went to, maybe with some friends, you get these warm memories. If you look back on the day I bought my big flat screen TV, no warm memories.
Is there like a heuristic or parameter that might help us better decide whether or not to make the purchase on a thing? Like if there's something that we're considering buying, like is there a framework that we can use to assess whether or not that thing is more likely to bring us happiness or a greater magnitude of happiness? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think the question might be, how quickly am I going to get used to this and just take it as the new normal?
Yeah.
So I buy a bigger house. Well, after a while, it's just your house. It's just where you live.
Yeah.
And so I think the question is, how much do we really want that next big thing, that fancier car? Maybe it will make you happy. I actually got a new car a few years ago that actually made me really happy. I was shocked.
Okay, so
So
why? Was it because you had like an emotional like investment in the car? Was it not like a car that that you've loved since your childhood or something? Like,
Well,
what's the story?
I'm a little embarrassed. It's a Tesla. It was the Model 3. It was the little Tesla. And I had thought that I wanted an electric car because I was tired of burning fossil fuels. And I loved the Teslas that I had read about. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to do this. I mean, I know material things don't make you happy, but so I
But
got
clearly,
I love the car.
yeah.
And what happened, I think the enjoyment is that it's the car happens to be an easy car. It's easy to drive, it's easy to operate, it doesn't require much maintenance. And so part of my pleasure is just that it gives me an ongoing freedom from some of the hassles I'm used to having with my previous cars.
I love that. See, I think that you can derive happiness from owning a small handful of very specific things,
Yeah.
dependent on not necessarily the number of things, but like the emotional value that we assign
Yeah.
to those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you obviously assign emotional value to not having to get out of your car and pump gas, right?
Yeah.
Both the hassle of it and the fact that you're no longer burning fossil fuels.
Yes. And that means a lot to me, right? So that adds some sense of meaning to my life.
Yeah. I bought when I was, first became semi-successful, I bought a guitar that I had pined for. And it was a guitar that was like, it's like a $1,500 guitar. It was like not a cheap guitar. Actually, I didn't pay that much. I paid like $500 for it. But at the time, $500 was a
A
lot
lot of money.
to spend on
Yeah.
a guitar
Yeah.
that I didn't need because I'm not a professional musician,
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm more than a hobbyist, but I'm like, and so I have that guitar hanging in my living room,
Yeah.
and every time I look at it, I'm like, I own that guitar.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you play it?
Yeah, I play it. I play it all the time.
See, that's the other thing. I think it's something you use all the time and you can get pleasure from, as opposed to simply an object that, that collects dust.
Yeah. It's also like a mindset thing. Like you have to recognize and appreciate that you are not your things, that your things could be gone in a minute,
Yeah.
in a second, they could burn in a fire, right?
Yeah.
But and so they shouldn't like take the place of like self-development and the relationships that we're talking about. But yeah,
Right. Right. Because those things, the self-development, the relationships, people can't take away from you. I mean, yes, we lose
Mm,
people in our lives, sure. But by and large, these are investments that stick around.
yeah. It's so crazy. What did anything over the course of writing The Good Life surprise you? Like, was there? Because I know that you're steeped in this topic and this is your life's
Yeah.
work. But
Yeah. What was great was we added all these stories. So these are the real life stories of our participants. And we've disguised them, we've changed the names, but they're really their stories. And what we found was that the stories were so good at illustrating many of the things we wanted to tell people. And and the stories also just illustrate that there's so many different ways to live a life, that we all take these different life paths, and that there's something kind of wonderful about that. There was no cookie cutter person in our study.
interesting.
Yeah.
Are they all still living in like the Boston area or?
Many have moved. Some of them just came to Harvard colleges from all over the country, so they will
Oh, because they
have
were
spread out.
students at the time?
Yeah, they were sophomores
Wow.
in college. The inner city people, many of them still live in Boston because they were from communities where you lived in big families. Less so now than 85 years ago, but still, many of them live in the Boston area.
That's so cool.
Yeah, we had a reunion once where we brought them together and they brought their kids and they were so proud of their families that they'd built.
Wow.
Yeah,
Because I mean, some of them are in their 90s, hundreds. And so the kids must be baby boomers.
exactly.
Wow.
And we've studied all the kids, 1,300 of them. And we're collecting data now on the kids, even today. Like we're studying what the pandemic was like for the second generation, and we're studying their social media use and their screen use and how it worked for them, particularly during the pandemic.
Mm. Was loneliness just off the charts during the pandemic?
Well, we didn't measure it moment to moment or even week to week. We wish we had, but what other studies have found is that yes, loneliness increased dramatically.
Wow. I wonder what the health consequences are going to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
of the past 2 years.
Well, that's the thing. We worried about COVID, but what we often neglected were the mental health consequences and the social isolation consequences.
Big problem.
Yeah,
Very sad.
yeah.
That's so interesting. I love that you get to do this work.
Oh, it's the best. I'm telling you, getting to look, I can go to my office and see these great big files, and I can start leafing through one person's file, and I can see what they were like when they were teenagers, and I can then see what they were like in their 20s and in their 30s, and you just feel like you're witnessing this life unfold.
Wow. And so diet and lifestyle definitely still play a role.
Oh yeah, big time.
Hmm.
Well, actually, we found that most of all of our Harvard guys obviously went to college and almost all finished. Only 25 of the 456 inner city men went to college, graduated from college because they were from families that didn't do that. Those 25 men lived just as long as the Harvard men, but the
Interesting.
other men from the inner city died on average 10 years earlier than
Oh.
the Harvard men. And we think that's because education had a lot to do with bringing to your awareness more of the health benefits of the things that we're talking about, eating well, exercise, not abusing alcohol and drugs. Those things began to be more prevalent in the culture in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I think that what happened was the more educated people got those messages sooner.
Hmm. Yeah. Education, lack of education is also an independent risk factor, right?
Yeah,
I mean, so many chronic conditions.
certainly for dementia, for
Yeah.
example.
How did this cohort um, exercise? Because this is one thing that I feel like maybe this is a misconception, but when I look at like my parents and the friends that my parents were around when I was growing up, exercise wasn't really valued
Yeah,
the way that it is today, right?
right.
So like, how did I mean? And they're and your cohort, I mean, some of them are living to their 90s and hundreds, right? And so
Yeah.
now we know that exercise is like this amazing boon. So how did that like play into the findings, right?
It was more functional for most of them. So they would get out there and play golf because they wanted to play golf,
Mm,
or maybe they played tennis, or, many of the inner city men had jobs where they were physically active all day long. Some of them were physical laborers. So exercise wasn't so much a thing, I
that's
mean,
crazy.
I know. Gyms were rare, right? Gyms were where these strange people who were weightlifters or boxers went.
It was strange, right?
Yeah.
It was I watched on Netflix, I don't know if you've seen Dahmer.
No.
It's incredible. It's
The
like
Jeffrey Dahmer?
yeah, it's about Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh.
It's like one of the most viewed shows on Netflix,
Oh, wow.
like ever. It's just the acting, everything.
How scary is it?
It's pretty dark.
Okay.
I don't know if you don't seem like the type that likes dark.
I don't,
It's
yeah.
pretty dark. But it's funny because it's you know, there's this scene where Jeffrey Dahmer is going into this it's like a bathhouse. And it's a bathhouse that's obviously populated by gay men in
Yeah.
this, in the series, and there's like a gym in it, and you see them, they're all working out and whatever. And I'm like, that's probably the only cohort that was like really working out back
Mhm.
then. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a broad generalization, but it really wasn't like, public gyms weren't really a thing until very recently.
Right. Right. And now, we know all the mental health benefits. A colleague of mine, a psychiatrist, gave a talk where he asked the audience of all psychiatrists, if you could develop an antidepressant medication that was side effect free, that had the most powerful effects of any other antidepressant, um, that was easy to take, would you? would you want that developed? And of course, everybody was, yeah. He said, well, exercise is it, right?
Man,
It is the most powerful antidepressant we have.
it's amazing that we got by for so long without
Yeah.
really doing it. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, as you mentioned, like some people had more, they were more active, they had jobs that, required more physical labor. But um, yeah, I wasn't around a single adult that exercised growing up. And it was something that I found when I was in my teens and I fell in love with.
Yeah. My father had terrible insomnia, and his general practitioner said to him, go swimming at the Y every noontime on your lunch break. And he did. And so he exercised almost every day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did it fix his insomnia?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Wow. It
Yeah,
got better after that.
got better.
Wow.
And it fixed his levels of stress too. He was less stressed because he exercised.
God, it really is medicine.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Is there a particular modality that you find comes up again and again in the psychiatric literature?
No, it seems to be a couple things. One seems to be about, getting your heart rate up for, a certain amount of time, like 30 minutes at a time, that kind of thing. And there's some strength training. I mean, we know that. You probably know this literature better than I do. So there's no formula. I think that the main thing is to do things that you find gratifying. That
Mm,
when they studied, okay, why do some people exercise and keep going, come back and do more? And why do some people exercise and just stop? And it had to do with one of two things. Either you felt better right away physically, like, oh, I like that, or eventually you saw some benefit, but pretty quickly. So the idea is that you had to see some payoff, you had to feel some payoff. And the people who felt better after they exercised were the people who kept coming back.
wow. So ultimately, you just have to find what you enjoy most.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing you can do is use your relationships. I mean, if you think about it, like if you are going to meet somebody at the gym and you know they're waiting for you, even if you don't feel like going, you'll kind of get yourself to go because they're waiting, right? So if you make dates with people to meet you for exercise, you're more likely to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They also have like a lot of group classes now,
Yeah.
group things. Yeah, that's really smart. I have a friend who was just on the show, Ben Bruno. He's a trainer, but he only works out when he's got a workout buddy to work out with,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
I feel like I love to work. I do solo workouts because it's my zen
Yeah.
space.
See, that's great. I think everybody needs their Zen. It doesn't have to be my Zen. It doesn't have to be sitting on a cushion. It could be working out. It could be gardening. It could be skiing. The thing I love about skiing is when you're skiing down a slope, you can't think about anything else. You just have to be in the moment. And so, whatever, maybe for you, it's the gym where it brings you to the present moment. That's really the Zen that we're after.
Mm.
Like just not being lost in the thought loops that we're usually lost in.
Oh, those thought loops,
Yeah, yeah,
like rumination,
yeah.
no bueno. How'd you become a Zen priest? Tell me that story.
It's a long. Um, so I've been practicing Zen for a lot of years, almost 20 years.
What does that mean?
It means I meditate every day. I sit with a group every week, and I have a teacher. Now I don't have a teacher. Actually, I am the teacher. But for most of my Zen practice, I had a teacher. And that meant that I had somebody I could talk to about it because my experience was meditation's hard. Like it's really simple and real hard to do. And when I would start feeling lost or discouraged, I really needed somebody to talk to. And having that person made an enormous difference for me. And so then gradually, I did more Zen training. I did a whole lot of koan practice. I don't know if you know koans or there's these they're like fragments of stories or riddles. The most famous Zen koan is, what is the sound of one hand clapping?
Oh yeah.
And actually, that's a mistranslation. It's really, what is the sound of the single hand,
Mm.
right? There's no logical answer. And it's meant to kind of jar us out of our usual logical thinking mind into something bigger. So I've done that.
Wow.
I've given a whole lot of Dharma talks now. I have to give one Monday night at my group. Um, I do so it's a commitment of service. I mean, basically, my experience is that this has been hugely helpful for me. It's really helped me change my orientation toward the world and toward myself. And that if there are people who want that, my vow as a Zen priest is to help them do that. Again, not for everybody by any means, but for the people who are drawn to it, I want to be there helping.
Amazing. Is the Zen koan sort of like a mantra that you meditate on, or
Yeah,
got it?
yeah.
Amazing. And when did this start for you?
Oh God. In my 50s, like early 50s, I wandered into the Unitarian church near my house, 5-minute walk. My son his buddy was having a coming of age ceremony, and the mom knew that I was interested in meditation. She pointed to the minister and said, "That guy is a Zen master." So I Googled him, went to see him in his office at the church, talked to him, and thought I could learn from this guy. And so I started studying with him.
Wow. Well, so you've studied Zen. Have you studied like the neuroscience, the neurobiology of like meditation and all that stuff?
I haven't studied it. I know some, for example, about Richie Davidson's work. There are a number of people who do study it. I haven't done those studies, but I know that what they show us is what people have known for thousands of years, that it really changes us.
Hmm. Yeah, it's powerful.
Yeah.
When people say that you're very Zen, it means it's usually interpreted as like you're very calm. You seem at peace.
Yeah. Although I'm not always calm and I'm not always happy. I
Hmm.
mean, like I'm having a good time talking with you, right?
Yeah.
But
Likewise.
like if something annoying happens an hour from now, I won't be happy. I mean, it comes and goes, right? And the reason I say that is that we can imagine that there's a place you can get to where you're always chill, where you're always happy, and that's just not the truth of anybody's life,
Hmm.
including mine. I mean, that said, I think that I get caught up in stupid worries a little less than I used to and can get out of it sooner. And I think I'm much more content than I used to be. Um,
Yeah. Do you recommend meditation for patients?
yeah, if I think it might be helpful. What I would say is I recommend that people try it. And if they don't like it, if it's really aversive, don't do it.
Hmm.
But many people who try it will say, "Oh, I would like to do that again." I may not even know why I want to do it again. I'm just feeling like I'd like to do it again. And those are the people who may want to stay with it.
Yeah. My experience with it, I'm not averse to it. I think it's wonderful. Like whenever I do it, I really appreciate having done it.
Yeah.
It's just very hard to get myself to the seat.
A lot
To
of
like
people feel that.
discipline.
Yeah. And I had that. Like I started meditating and before I found my teacher. And every time I got stressed or busy, I'd stop. And I kept saying to myself, I know that's the time when you want to keep doing it. Somebody said to me, you need a group to sit with and you need a teacher. And when you find those, you'll be able to do it regularly on your own. And that turned out to be true for me.
Wow. So how do you divvy up your time then? Like your obligations to Harvard, which I'm sure are significant, and your obligations to the Zen priesthood.
Well, my wife calls Zen my great big hobby. Like I do a lot of it's a lot of what I do in my spare time. So last weekend we had a retreat. So all weekend we meditated and then I came out here to talk with you.
Is your wife into it?
She's not. She's not. But she's really into music. So that's her Zen.
Is she a musician?
She plays the piano, she
Wow.
sings, she's really good. And, but she does it, just for herself, but
Yeah.
she loves it. And for her, that's what brings her into the present moment. She can get lost in playing a Beethoven sonata, right? Where she's just in it, not thinking about anything else.
That's like what they call flow.
Exactly. That's flow. And my hope is that people find something they can do that gives them that experience of flow some of the time.
Hmm. Flow's powerful.
Mm.
Have you studied that at all?
I haven't. There are psychologists who have, but it's not part of our research.
Yeah. No, I mean, but just generally, do you like you're familiar
Yeah.
with like the phenomena that is flow?
Yep.
What is it? It's like because I feel like it's like this. I know when I'm in it,
Yeah.
but I couldn't tell you like what's going on.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I think what I've come to understand about it is that you you don't even think about it when you're in it because
Mm.
you're just in it, right? And time flies, right? You're just there. And I think that's a very gratifying experience, very satisfying experience to not be worried about what's going on, to not be monologuing while you're doing whatever you're doing, just to be in it. That's flow. And one of the things that meditation helps us cultivate is that experience of letting the thoughts just be and coming back to presence.
Wow. Is Zen meditation different than like transcendental meditation? Than I don't even know all the other
Yeah.
types. Guided meditation.
Well, Zen is a form of Buddhism. Zen is kind of the Japanese and Chinese flavor of Buddhism. And so it has a Buddhist foundation with kind of central philosophical principles. So transcendental meditation, as I understand it, is not based on that. It's a technique and a very powerful technique. So meditation is a technique, but Zen and other forms of Buddhism ground it in principles like the fact that everything's always changing, the fact that the more we cling to something and try to make it stand still, the more we suffer. Some of these basic principles that I find incredibly helpful.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially as you navigate modern life.
Really. I mean, and look, I'm at Harvard. I've been at Harvard my whole adult life. Harvard is all about being worried about status and achievement. And, what I realized pretty quickly was that that stuff is all going to pass away. And so why are we all so worried about it? And Zen has really helped me kind of come to terms with that and put it in more perspective.
Wow. Was there a time in your life where you were more interested in that stuff, like status,
Yeah, and
prestige?
yeah, and I still get twinges of it. I do, where I say, "Oh, that person got that award," or "That person got invited to that party and I didn't." It still comes up,
Mm,
but I see it a little more clearly and I can put it away sooner.
wow.
Um,
I'm so grateful that the FOMO that I had when I was like in my 20s, that's gone. Like I don't really
yeah,
it's exhausting.
it is exhausting and it makes us so unhappy.
Yeah. It's just not productive to anything. I mean,
No.
maybe it like compels you as you ascend the social and professional ladder. Maybe there's an aspect of it that's like motivating. But yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, if it's a signal that there's something important that you want to do or that you want to get, that can be useful, as you're saying. But if it's just, oh, she's got more than I do, he's more popular than I am, that stuff um, is so counter to well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the good life, do you have like a is there like a plan? Who's like the person that stands to gain the most from it, or is it everybody?
Well, I'd like to think everybody, because I think there are a lot of things each of us could do in our relationships to strengthen them. But I think there are, we have exercises in there that people can do, ways to take stock of where you are with your relationships and what you can do to strengthen them. Um, and the stories, I think, really help as people read other people's life stories. They kind of get ideas. Oh, that sounds like me.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a beautiful book, and you can tell that you obviously put a lot of heart and soul
This was a labor of love.
into the book, and it's
Yeah.
it's your first book
For a popular
for a
audience.
popular
Yeah.
audience. Yes,
Yeah.
for a popular audience, because you're
Yeah.
what I mean. You're legendary in the academic world and all your publications. But this is
Well,
this is incredible.
yeah. Well, let's just say I've published many things in academic journals that nobody reads.
Well, but it changes science, and that has the impact of helping people who really need the help,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, it's definitely
Right. And the science is what infuses this book, and that's important. So it's not just my opinion or my co-author Mark's opinion. It's really all of this is based on pretty good science.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
The way we deal with this inner world of ours drives everything. It drives how we come to our relationships, our health, our well-being, every aspect of how we love, how we live, how we parent, and how we lead.